Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So today I wanted to talk to you about the skill gems, so rather the skill system in general, and how the skill system works, like how you can get the most out of it, what you can do to like maybe finagle the system a little bit, and we'll talk about this together. So how does the gem system work, and what can you do to make it work better? Well, one thing that I would recommend is that you go into the options for the game and you go over to the game options. And in the game options, there is something called gem cutting restrictions. Gem cutting restrictions doesn't really help you very much if you know what you're doing. In fact, it actually kind of hurts you actively. And hopefully by the end of this, you will know what you're doing. So I would highly recommend that you uncheck gem cutting restrictions. And we're going to talk about this together. Now, there are several different things that you're going to get a hold of when you are leveling your character. And let me clear out my inventory real quick because obviously we don't want all this trash in here. I like to salvage those superior items for armor scraps and socketed items for artificer's shards. And now we have our inventory mostly clear. We're going to grab out some of these skill gems. So there are different types of skill gems. First off, there is the skill gem itself. This is a uncut skill gem, and let's grab a couple of these because we're going to use these for some specific purposes. We also have spirit gems. Spirit gems is a different kind of gem. These are specific to spirit abilities, and we'll be talking about these as well. And then we also have the support gems. Now, support gems come in three types. They come in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And for the purposes of this particular video, we're going to be looking at the Tier 3 support gems. So we're going to take a look at these. Now, you see that we have every single level of gem in here. So we've got Tier 2 uncut skill gems. We've got all the way up to Tier 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. We've even got 18, and it goes even higher than that. I'm pretty sure that it caps out at 25, if I remember correctly. Now, think about the level of the skill gem as equivalent to the level of the ability. That's essentially how this works. So when you right-click on a skill gem, it's going to open the gem cutting panel. And the reason why we removed the gem cutting restrictions is because we want to see all of the things that we could potentially do with this, which is going to help us out tremendously. Now, every single skill has a specific tier of a minimum requirement that it's required to use that a particular ability. Now, it's not necessarily a level requirement. The level requirement is separate. So if you look at this particular skill, this is a Tier 1. So you only need a Tier 1 skill gem to be able to make this particular ability. This particular ability requires a Tier 3. This one requires a Tier 5, and so forth and so on. So what would happen if I utilized a skill gem that was too low? Well, it just wouldn't let you make that particular item. Like, for instance, if I grab an uncut skill gem Tier 2, you'll see that most of the tree is going to be grayed out for me. This is because the minimum level for these particular skills is the minimum level for that gem slot. So if I wanted to make snipe, it has to be a minimum level of 3 or higher. Now, what this comes into play with is requirements. So when you make an ability, it has a specific set of requirements based on the level that you created at. For example, if I make Poison Burst at level 2, it only has a dex requirement of 9. However, if I make Poison Burst at level 16, you'll notice that now it has a dex requirement of 151. This means that hanging on to lower tier skill gems is actually very handy because in the future, if you are, in a situation where you would like to use an ability, but you don't necessarily want to utilize the high dexterity version, like you want a slightly lower version, then hanging on to all of your skill gems at various levels is going to offer you the ability to customize the requirements. As you can see, 10 is only 83 dexterity, and so forth and so on. So we have two things going on here. First is the level tier that is required. Then there is the level requirement of the ability. And then there is also the actual requirement of the ability in its stats. So does it require dex? Does it require, various other things? And does the level requirement go up with that requirement? So in this particular case, you see that Poison Burst is only level 3, and it is 9 dexterity. In the case of the 10, it is level 36 and 83 dexterity. And in the case of the 15 or the A16, it is now level 66 and 151 dexterity. So as the abilities increase in level, you are going to see this change. Now, to show you how this works, if I were to make Poison Burst at a low level, like as for an example, and it's going to tell me that I have the incorrect weapon type. Because I turned off the gem cutting requirements, I can make it anyway, despite the warning. So we're going to do this. So I'm going to engrave this. And as you can see, now I have a level 2 Poison Burst. Now, if I try to put this into the tree, it will not let me because I don't have a bow on, which is, you know, that's actually pretty good because obviously you don't want to put skills on that you can't actually utilize. Now, if I want to level this, all I have to do is use another uncut skill gem, go over to the bow, and I can level up this ability, which will allow me to get a higher ability. You can also potentially just engrave another item. In this particular case, it's not letting me upgrade it because I'm not actually using it. So let's go ahead and just put on any bow. It doesn't really matter. And then it's going to let me put this on. When I right-click on the uncut skill gem, now it's going to offer me the option to upgrade it. Or it's not because of the dex requirement. So in this particular case, it's like, oh, you don't have enough dexterity for that. So we can't upgrade that. So let's use a tier 6 instead. And now you see it has a plus arrow. So when I upgrade this, it's going to take my tier 2 and it's going to upgrade it to the tier 6. So now I have a tier 6. And this is going to be something that you're going to be doing the entire time along. So as you level up your character, as you find more of these uncut skill gems, you are going to go through the process of upgrading these skills to keep up with the increasing level of the skill gems, which of course is going to upgrade the level of the skill, which means it's going to do more damage, which means you're going to be getting stronger as you're upgrading these skills. So it's definitely something that you don't want to neglect as you're leveling, is keeping those skills upgraded with the new points, right? So like in this particular case, you can see that I'm currently using Explosive Grenade, which is level 17, and it also has +3 skill levels from global modifiers, so we're 18, 19, 20, so I'm currently at level 20 with this particular ability. I could potentially upgrade this to tier 18 as an example. I do have some tier 18 gems. Let me see if I can do that. So let's go up here and let's grab one of these 18s. And are we capable of upgrading our explosive shot? So it says that we don't have enough dexterity, which is interesting. There is a glitch in the game right now, and this is something that needs to be stated, is that the Gemling Legionnaire specifically, as well as some other characters if you're running it, if you're utilizing the things that reduce the cost and attribute requirements of abilities, the engraving system doesn't take this into account, unfortunately, when it is actually calculating the amount required. So in this particular case, I have quite a bit of attribute requirements negative on this particular character, which makes it so that my attribute requirements for an ability are actually a lot lower than is actually stated. Now, in some cases, you may just have to put on a piece of equipment that has the appropriate amount of dexterity to do this if you're in that situation. So, like, for instance, with me, I might just go over to, like, gloves or something, and we could just find something that has a, like, really large amount of dexterity on them. So let's see, we've got some 9, there's some 19 dex boots. Do mine have any dexterity on them? They do not. So in this particular case, I could just simply put on the boots, and then I would have enough dexterity to be able to do the upgrade. And there's no guarantee that I don't have enough stat requirements. I would have to actually do the math. So 97 dexterity, minus my current bonuses, which I believe are... I'm trying to remember here. So I've got 4, I think it's 4 times 4, if I'm remembering correctly. So we got what? 4, 4, that's 8. And then I also have another 4 and 4, which is another 8. So we've got basically 16, right? So 16%. So we take the 97 and we subtract 16% from that, which will bring us down to 81.48, which my current dex requirements without those boots is 88. So I should technically have enough in this particular case. So upgrading it is probably not going to be an issue. And I can switch this back over. And as you can see, despite the fact that I have not enough dexterity according to the system, I'm still firing the explosive grenades just fine. So if you are utilizing Gembling Legionnaire or you're utilizing the negative requirements for the equipment, do be aware that sometimes there is a little bit of a glitch there. So once you have your abilities in your tree, you have skill slots. Gembling Legionnaire has extra skill slots, but all the classes have skill slots, and you're going to put your skill into the slot. And you can upgrade this skill with support gems. Now, when you first put a skill on your bar, it only has 2 pitiful slots. It's very sad. You can, however, upgrade this. Now, there's 2 ways that you can potentially upgrade this, and we'll be talking about them. The first way has to do with your basic skills. So as you can see, I currently have Crossbow Shot here. Crossbow Shot is a basic skill, and it cannot be upgraded in the usual manner. It's actually upgraded by level. So as you level up your character, your basic attack will get more support gems. It starts out at 2, and it increases to 3 around, I think it's like Act 3, and then eventually you start to get into 4, and I'm assuming if I get a high enough level, I'll eventually get my 5th slot with your basic skill. So you don't have to actually get the slots for this one. This one is just automatic, and it's going to be dependent on your character. Like if you're using a mace, it's probably going to be mace strike. Crossbow is the regular basic shot. If you're utilizing like a bow, it's going to be the basic bow shot, and so forth and so on. So keep that in mind as you go forward, that you don't have to actually level these. Now, regular skills do need to actually be increased in the number of sockets that you can potentially do. In this particular case, when it comes to currency, there are 3 pieces of currency that you're going to utilize to add, or rather 4 pieces of currency that you're going to utilize to add sockets. The first one is the Lesser's Jeweler Orb. These are very common, and you can pick them up for relatively cheap. I'll show you how. So if you happen to have at least 1 Exalt, which is a pretty easy thing to come by, you can take your 1 Exalt to Alva here, who has the currency exchange. And I can put in here, I have 1 Exalted Orb, and I want a Lesser's Jeweler Orb. And as you can see, the current ratio is 12 to 1, so you can pick up 12 Lesser Jeweler Orbs for the price of 1 Exalt. So I'm going to go ahead and put, let's put 1 Jeweler Orb, and let's put 13 Lesser Jeweler Orbs, or you know what, let's do 14, why not? The market ratio seems to be fluctuating a lot, so let's go 14. And you put this order up here, and you see if anyone will take it. If they take it, it's going to say order completed, and on the left-hand side, it's going to have the orbs for you. As you can clearly see, you can get a large number of orbs, even if mine specifically doesn't come through, but it looks like it did. So I got 14 Jeweler's Orbs, as you can see, for 1 Exalt, which is pretty darn cheap, in my opinion. The other ones, however, are kind of expensive. And by kind of expensive, I mean a butt-ton expensive. Greater Jeweler's Orbs, which will enhance you from 3 to 4, are currently 31 Exalts. So you're not picking these things up for cheap. So 31 Exalts for 1 Greater Jeweler Orb, and you think that's expensive. Wait until you see the Perfect Jeweler's Orb, which is 179 Exalts. This one is going to bring you from 4 to 5. Now, there is a lot of power to be gained by adding sockets. So you're just going to right click on your orb, and you're going to click on the skill that you potentially want to add sockets to, and then you get an additional socket. It's just as simple as that. There is a cheat method that you can potentially use to get 1 additional socket, and unfortunately it's also kind of a poopy one in terms of what it potentially can do to mess you up. So what do I mean by messing you up? Well, in this particular case, let's say, for instance, I wanted to add an additional socket to Explosive Shot, or I wanted to add an additional socket to Explosive Grenade. The Val Orb is one of the items in the game that can potentially give you additional sockets. But let me strongly caution you against using this option, because it is an option that disables all future progress on an ability. If you are using this, you should be using this at the end of everything before you are going into the final stages of your ability. Now, what do I mean by the final stages of your ability? Well, okay. So let's play around with this for a second, and let's talk about it. So when you look at an ability, abilities have a couple different things that you can potentially do to them. Number one is they have levels, which you can obviously upgrade the levels of an item. You can also add sockets to the item. to the skill. So in this particular case, with explosive grenade, I have 4 sockets already. You can also add quality. And quality does various things on these abilities, and I do have some gem crutter prisms, so I can show you this. So in this particular case, if you hold the Alt key, you'll see that the additional effects from quality is increased cooldown recovery rate. That's what I'm currently at. And gem cutter, or sorry, the Gemling Legionnaire gives quality by default, by the way, if you take those passives. Now, if you use the Val Orb on this, you can no longer add quality, you can no longer add sockets, and I'm not even sure if you can even level it up anymore, which would also technically be an issue. Now, this could be a cheap way for you to get a 5-link. If you already have a 4-link, you could potentially gamble on a 5th link by using the Val Orb on this. I don't recommend it. First off, you have to increase the quality of this skill to its maximum before you use the Val Orb, because you will never be able to increase the quality after. You also need to get it as high of a level as you possibly can, because I'm not even sure if you can level it up once you have Val Orbed it. On top of this, there is the possibility that it could potentially do something negative or not give you the socket at all, bricking the skill entirely and making it so that you can never get a 5th socket. So this means that if you Val Orb a skill, for instance, if I Val Orbed Explosive Grenade, and it did not get a 4th socket, or 5th socket, then even if I had a Perfect Jeweler's Orb, I could not make it into a 5-socket item anymore, or a 5-link, because that is the end of the road for that. You also would definitely not want to use this to turn a 3-link into a 4-link, because if you did that, even if you succeeded, you would never be able to make it a 5-link, which is also just a very, very bad way of doing things. In general, when it comes to the Val Orbing of the skills, it's something that is better left for the end of your character's life. Like, I'm talking about like you're level 90 plus and your skills are perfect and you're just trying to take a gamble at not having to utilize, like the thing, like the additional, like 200 or like 170 at this particular point exalts to get that 5th socket. There's also a chance it could potentially make your skills go up 1 in level. There's a bunch of other things that it can potentially do. Val Orbs are absolutely crazy. They're basically just gamble orbs, and I don't really recommend using them on a regular basis. Gem Cutter Prisms, like I said, will increase what your skill does. However, what your skill does is random. So there are like tons of different things. Like some might be cooldown recovery rate. Some might be things like shock duration. Cluster Grenade is fuse duration. Elemental Conflux gives you more of a damage buff, and so forth and so on. There are definitely a lot of very nice things that you could potentially add to abilities through Gem Cutter Prisms, and that's amazing. Now, moving on to the next part is the support gems. Now, support gems have a strict rule of only 1 support gem is capable of being used at any given time. However, there is one exception to this rule, and it has to do with the Gemling Legionnaire. The Gemling Legionnaire has a special buff. It is called Gem Studded, and it says you can use 2 copies of the same support gem in different skills. Now, this means that if I want, say, for instance, Scattershot on one ability, I can put Scattershot on a completely different ability. Now, normally, for most characters, you can only use 1 support gem 1 time, which means that you are stuck. With the Gemling Legionnaire, you have the ability to use 2 support gems 1 time each. So you can get basically a second support gem of that exact type in your build, which is actually very, 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 very powerful. Support gems come in a variety of colors. They come in red. They come in blue. They come in blue, and they come in green. Now, these support gems are a specific stat, so you got to keep this in mind. So this is red is strength, dex is green, obviously, and intelligence is blue. Now, why do these have colors, and what does it matter? Well, at the top of the screen here, you will see a stat that says support gem capacity, and it tells you how many of the support gems you are capable of utilizing of each individual color. So, for instance, in this particular case, I'm capable of using 23 strength support gems. I'm capable of using 17 dex support gems, and I'm capable of using 23 intelligence support gems. So you can see it clearly says the lists how many support gems you can have of each attribute. You can have one support gem per 5 points in that attribute. So if you do not have a large amount of strength, dexterity, or intelligence, there is a good chance that you might not be able to use a large number of support gems from those specific categories. Like, for instance, if you do not have a large amount of intelligence, you may be restricted from utilizing a large number of intelligence support gems. Support gems come in 3 different tiers. You have tier 1 support gems, which is going to be something that you're going to get early on. Tier 1 support gems are basically all you have access to at the beginning of the game, and for the most part, you just can't really, like, utilize any of the other ones. You're going to have to wait on the higher ones. Eventually, you will come across Support Gem 2 and Support Gem 3s, and toward the end game, you will have so many Support Gem 3s that you will not know what to do with them. And the interesting thing here is there doesn't seem to be any level requirement on Support Gem 3s, so later on, when you do have a higher level character and you are collecting a large number of Support Gem 3 gems, you can just hand these to your low level characters, and now they can have access to all of the Support Gem sockets, which is something I highly recommend because it makes the game so much more fun to get access to these abilities, which is really, really amazing. Now, what do support gems do? Well, support gems have positives and they also have negatives. So generally, in most cases, if you take a look at any support gem, you will find that the support gem has a positive effect, and it also kind of has a negative effect. And how does this work? So let's take a look at Fork as a projectile bonus. Fork says it has a cost multiplier of 110%. This means that it takes the cost of the ability and it increases it. For instance, if I take it off right now and take a look at Explosive Shot, you'll see that it costs 90 mana, which is, you know, a decent amount of mana. That's actually a pretty big chunk of my mana pool. However, if I put the Fork Gem back in, you'll notice that now it costs a higher amount of mana, or it should anyway. My cost multiplier is not functioning here. 75 mana to 90 mana, 90 mana. Cost multiplier is not showing up on the thing. Let's try Explosive Grenade. Explosive Grenade might be easier to see. So 144 mana to 172. It might have something to do with Explosive Shot has like an ammunition thing, so it's weird. So as you can see here, the 120% cost multiplier definitely did increase my mana cost from 144 mana to 172 mana, which is a pretty big difference, right? Then it also has something that it's doing for you, obviously. So these support gems are going to be very, very valuable to do a specific task. In the Fire Penetration's case, it's giving me penetrating fire resistance, which means that if the monster has resistances, I treat that as 30% lower than what it is. So if they're at 50, then I treat that as 20, and so forth and so on. Now, as far as I'm understanding, you can't go into the negative with fire resistance or penetration specifically, although from my testing, it does seem that abilities that apply cold exposure, fire exposure, lightning exposure, basically any exposure ability can potentially put it into negative. It's kind of odd. We did get a confirmation that negative resistances are possible, because they did a patch note fix on Heavy Frost where they specifically stated that Heavy Frost was ignoring negative resistances for some reason. So negative resistances do exist, but still not exactly 100% entirely sure how to get there. Now, there's tons and tons and tons of gems that you can potentially use, support gems, for abilities. And they're going to modify your ability in hundreds of different ways. Like there is a Scattershot ability, which, for instance, in this particular case, if you look at my explosive grenades, you'll see that I only have 2 grenades. However, if I have explosive grenades, like on my Scattershot on my grenades, I can do something like this instead. So as you can see now I have 4. So Scattershot allows me to add an additional projectile, 2 additional projectiles, but in the process I lose damage. So supported skills deal 20% less damage. Less is multiplicative, and it's actually quite a large amount of damage decrease. This means that the ability is going to be far less damaging than it was normally, except you're going to get 2 additional projectiles as a result. Also, supported skills have 20% less attack and cast speed, which is also a multiplicative less on the attack and cast speed. You can clearly see this when you take the gem off and put the gem back on. So as you can see here, I have 3,253 damage, and if I take the Scattershot gem off, I go to 2,897. So you can clearly see this damage increase and damage decrease on the panel. In fact, if I pull it up here, it's a little bit easier to see. So this more and less is actually going to provide a rather large amount of damage increase and decrease for my character. So when you look at these gems, a lot of the times you're looking at them as, okay, is it worth me using this for the positive that it's offering to the negative? And there are so many support gems. I could go over these support gems for days. Let's talk about some of the other things that you can potentially do to make choosing support gems easier. So does the support gem work with my ability? This is a good question. So the easiest way to do this is to not use the all gem option down here. Instead, what you want to do is you want to click on the ability that you want, like for instance Voltaic Grenade, and then you want to go down here and uncheck this box that says show recommended gems. And what it's going to do is it's going to show you all of the gems that are potentially compatible with Voltaic Grenade. And this is going to give you a large number of options. Like for instance, I could use Payload, which is supported skills have 70% reduced recovery rate, but grenades fired by the supported skills have 50% chance to activate a second time. So this is actually kind of a very heavy positive and a very heavy negative. So 70% reduced recovery rate means that they're going to be on cooldown a hell of a lot more often. In fact, it's going to be a pretty large cooldown increase. However, on top of this, you also get a 50% chance that the grenades just simply activate a second time when you fire them, which is going to be amazing. So that means you're going to be able to get more burst damage at the price of losing sustain, because you're not going to be able to fire off the abilities as frequently. For instance, my current cooldown is 4.72 seconds, and if I grab Payload and I utilize this one, you'll see that I can increase my cooldown to 8.33 seconds. But that does give me the ability, potentially, to have second firing of the ability, right? However, you can also get this utilizing passive tree points as well. There is a option to have second firing on the passive tree as well, and it doesn't come with that same negative. It's down here, I believe. Where are you hiding at? Right here. 15% chance to activate a second time. So you can get passive ones that also do the same thing. This is Mr. Doohan, by the way. He's being a butt. Why he's being a butt? Don't be a butt. Be a fluff. So when you're putting support gems on an ability, you do have to keep this in mind of the negatives for the positives. Too many support gems can potentially cause your ability to cost a relatively large amount of mana. It can increase the cooldown to relatively ridiculous proportions, but you can get so many amazing things from these support gems to enhance the ability in the direction that you want. For instance, I'm currently utilizing Stormfire, which is shocks from supported skills do not expire on ignited enemies. I'm burning monsters with the oil grenade, because oil grenade lights them on fire. It also applies fire exposure, and as long as they are burning, they are going to remain shocked. So I get to have things that will allow me to gain ridiculous bonuses, essentially, right? The negative of this one is that if you're not igniting enemies, well, then you don't get the effect, and it burns up one of your support gem sockets. Support gems definitely can create amazing combinations for your abilities and give you some just absolutely crazy things to do. Now we have Spirit Gems. So Spirit Gems are another form of gem that you can potentially utilize, and Spirit Gems are an entirely different category of options. These are effects which are often passive in some way, although some of them can be active bonuses, and things like Arctic Armor, which apply a shield around you. Now the thing about Spirit Gems is that Spirit Gems cost Spirit Reservation. So what does this mean, Spirit Reservation? Well, as you're leveling up, you're going to get Spirit bonuses. There are quite a few passive bonuses that you can get, as well as there are items in the game that can add Spirit to your character. Like, for instance, there are amulets that have Spirit. There are armors that have Spirit. There is a unique shield that has Spirit. There are scepters that give Spirit, and so forth and so on. And so as you stack Spirit, you can stack more of these passive buffs. In my particular case, I am utilizing Elemental Conflux, which is a very powerful one for my particular character. And Elemental Conflux allows me to gain a huge bonus to my elemental damage, randomizing between elements. You can actually see this on my back if you look. It is currently on fire, and it's about to switch to ice. And the damage bonus that it gives me is pretty massive. If you take a look at Plasma Blast, this is the easiest one to see this on, you will see that my damage type changes with each individual firing. Right now it's on cold, so I'm doing 56,458 cold. And then it just changed to fire, so now I am doing a larger amount of fire damage than the other elements. And now it's going to change to lightning, and so now I have 38,905 lightning, and so forth and so on, which is going to just constantly shift this bonus to various elements. There's other types of passives, like for instance Overwhelming Presence, which doesn't really show up, which allows me to freeze, shock, ignite monsters a lot easier, as well as stun monsters a lot easier, because it lowers the monster's elemental ailment threshold. Spirit abilities are going to be specific to your character and what you're trying to choose. There are abilities in here that are pretty nice, but one of the problems that I've had with these is that a lot of these are locked to, like, on killing things. Like Herald of Ash requires you to kill things. Herald of Ice requires you to, like, freeze things, which doesn't really help you on bosses. So Herald of Ash doesn't really help you versus bosses. Herald of Ice doesn't really help you versus bosses. Herald of Thunder doesn't really help you versus bosses, and so forth and so on. Some of these are decent bonuses that you can add into your build, and they definitely can be helpful. Cast on Shock, Cast on Freeze, Cast on Ignite all got nerfed pretty heavily and are hard to utilize now. Cast on Crit still works very, very well, and basically what it does is it just simply casts your spell. I don't particularly like these abilities because not only do they still use mana, but on top of that, they also burn your cooldowns if you're utilizing that ability in another socket. And as of current, because of some of the changes that they made, they're just not really functioning as well as they should. Basically, how these abilities work is once you reach 100% by freezing monsters or chilling them or igniting them or critting on them or whatever it may be, it's supposed to cast the ability right away. But for some reason or another, with a lot of these abilities, sometimes they'll get to 100%. You'll see them at 100% appear in this little buff bar, and then they just won't cast anything. And I don't know exactly why that is. I've actually counted it out before. I've watched it go to 100% and then sat there and watched it not cast the ability for like 30 seconds straight. Like it just wouldn't cast the ability. Mr. Doohan. Why are you so chonky? You got a big chonky belly. He's a big chonk of chonkers. He said, I'm gonna bite you. He said, you don't want to get bit? Because that's how you get bit. Blow on his little fat tummy. Big old chonky boy. He's a chonk of chonkums. Chonky boy, would you like a piece of this? Okay, that's enough. Don't want to give you too many sweets. It's just a Nutri-Grain bar. So anyway, as you're choosing through these, you're going to choose a specific one, and you're going to obviously upgrade these abilities. Now, one of the problems that I've had with a lot of these spirit abilities is that, well, you can't really add support gems to them for the most part. Some of them you can. Like Elemental Conflux, you totally can. And Cast on Crit and Cast on Freeze and whatnot, you totally can. Because what you're adding to them is actually the spells and the support gems for those spells. So for the most part, the cost is like upfront in terms of the gems. So in this particular case, you can see it's 100 spirit. Down here in the corner, you see my spirit. It says I currently have 3 out of 143 spirit. Now, one of the problems that I have with a lot of the other ones is that you can't really add very good support gems to them because the spirit cost requirement on those support gems makes it next to impossible to get good gems on them. For instance, take Overwhelming Presence. If I remove the requirement here, you can see that I don't really have a lot of options for this particular gem. And as you can see, I have like Clarity, it requires an additional 10 Spirit. I have Vitality, it requires an additional 20 Spirit. I have Precision, it requires an additional 10 Spirit. Cannibalism, an additional 15 Spirit. Herbalism, an additional 15 Spirit. And the problem that I came across here was that most of the time when it came to my support spell skills for the actual Spirit abilities, in a lot of cases, you really just can't add support gems to them because in a lot of the cases, you just don't have enough spirit. So it's either a choice between running the support gems and running the abilities themselves. Now, the abilities themselves are usually far more valuable than running the support gems. So, in 99% of the situations, unless you have an extremely large amount of excess spirit to spend, you're pretty much just going to choose not to run the support gems on the spirit abilities. And there's definitely some problems there that I think they need to address in terms of like the cost of the spirit abilities versus the cost of the support gems for the spirit abilities. I mean, a lot of the times when it comes to these, I usually just don't even add anything to them, which is just they're just kind of poopy in terms of that. Like, I like the effects, like having 30% increased mana regeneration while the skill is active is certainly nice, but 10 spirit requirement may not be something that I can afford. And in the case of like vitality, vitality is 20 spirit. And by the time I'm done, like if I add, for instance, vitality on here, like as an example, vitality is 20 and clarity is 10. Now I've just spent 30, which I could be using on another spirit gem. So there's definitely some weirdness going on in terms of the spirit gems, and maybe it's just because they haven't really added like all of the support gems for this particular ability, which is kind of unfortunate. He was trying to tinkle on me, so I put him in timeout. I think that's pretty much it for this. Like, the support gems are definitely something that you're going to be utilizing a lot. The spirit gems are definitely something you're going to be utilizing a lot, and so are these skill gems. You're going to want to collect them all. Like, I think that as I went on, like, I first started, I was like, oh, well, what do I want these, like, piddly level, Skier 5 skill gems for? And then I started to realize, well, these high level ones have like a really high stat requirement, and like if I wanted to utilize, say, Frost Bomb or something on a range character that is mainly a dexterity based, Frost Bomb has a relatively high intelligence requirement, as an example. So if I go over to Frost Bomb and look at it, it's like 151 intelligence if I use a high level version of the skill, which means that if I'm trying to use this on a low level character, I'm probably going to be much better off utilizing a lower level version of Frost Bomb that has a lower intelligence requirement, which is going to be absolutely amazing. The combination of these abilities, like how you use them, no class is restricted from any specific ability, as an example. And to make sure that this is very clear, only the abilities sometimes have a weapon requirement. So, like, for instance, with the bow skills, these do require bow. But, like, Voltaic Mark does not require a bow, which means that any class could potentially utilize this ability. You just have to fulfill the requirements. Some abilities do require their specific martial weapon, but some abilities do not. Like, they say any martial weapon, or even unarmed. So keeping that in mind. Elemental and occult skills are technically spells in most regards, and so they function as spells for most abilities, which means they go off of spell damage and not off of your weapons damage, which also means that this might not be a good thing if you're built entirely for weapon damage. However, if you're like a sorceress, you can dive into the occult tree, and if you're a witch, you can dive into the elemental tree from the sorceress. It really isn't that big of a deal. The important thing is that you build a character that actually functions, obviously, and utilize it to the best of your ability. You're on timeout. Could you try to tinkle on me? So bad. B. I think that pretty much covers everything. If you guys have any questions about the skill gem system, how it works, what you could potentially do with it, why certain things aren't functioning the way that they should be, just let me know. There are some like complicated additionals that you have to be aware of. Like, you can utilize two of the same skill on your bar, but there are some very odd things that go along with it. Like, for instance, if two skills have cooldowns, I've noticed that if I took like two explosive grenades and put them on my bar at the same time, for some reason, like, they'll share cooldowns. So like I fire one and the cooldown for the other one will activate. Or like if you take a skill, like say for instance I'm utilizing Frostbomb as my main ability, and then I also put Frostbomb into cast on freeze so that it uses it. It will start burning my cooldowns on my ability, like on my bar, from the cast on freeze, which is weird. There's a lot of strange things that go on when using two abilities. In fact, there was a bug for a little while where you could potentially have like two ammo reloads. It's one of my abilities where you can reload your ammunition really fast. It's like emergency reload, and it would like somehow cause the cooldown to get stuck in a loop, and it would allow you to have like infinite emergency reloads. I'm assuming that a lot of this stuff is eventually going to get fixed with using two of the same skill on your bar. But for the most part, you're really just limited to one of the mains of your skill. There's just a lot of funky things that go on when you try putting like two of the same skill on your bar at the same time. Anyway, as always, I appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about skill gems. And as always, keep watching.